First of all, I want to welcome everyone, and I want to thank our esteemed panelists for joining us this evening. We have Jen Aosa, who is the Baltimore County Chief Sustainability Officer. We have Paul Kazak, who is an award-winning scientist and Johns Hopkins lecturer. And we also have Judith Hank, who is the president of Beyond Plastics. I also want to thank our group executive committee and the chair of that group, Deborah Spice-Kleinman, and Rob Freer, who chairs our Zero Waste team, Martha Ainsworth, who chairs the Chapter Zero Waste team, and also Zainab Aiken, who helped to organize this event for us. I also want to give a little shout out to some of the other folks from other environmental groups who have joined us this evening, including Theo Le Gardeur and Bill Temmick from Gunpowder Riverkeepers, Jennifer Kunze from Clean Water Action, Patty Mokel from Greenhouse and Alliance and the rest of the Baltimore County Green Alliance, Kimberly Tucker of Gunpowder Valley Conservancy, the League of Conservation Voters, and also the Audubon Society, and everyone else who's working on climate change and preserving our environment. I apologize if I missed others as they joined. And I also want to thank Councilman David Marks, who has been very supportive of Sierra Club and is working on a bill to phase out single-use plastic bags in our county. It's a first step of many things that we need to accomplish here. I also want to thank endorsed candidates Jennifer White, who we hope will become a delegate for District 10 in our county, and Mike Ertel, who's running for County Council. I also want to thank you all for your interest in this subject and willingness to become part of the solutions. All right, now I'm going to All right, can all of you see that? Okay, perfect. So for those of you who are just joining us now, the chat will be open while I'm speaking. If you have any questions, we ask you that you put them in the Q&A section. It'll be easier for us to find your questions there. I'm just going to very briefly run through the movie, just the highlights, just in case some of you didn't get a chance to watch it all. The link for the movie will still be open until October 1st. So if you didn't get the chance to finish it, don't panic. You can certainly go back and watch it. And we certainly hope that you will do that. First of all, I want to thank the people for making The Story of Plastic. It's an incredible documentary. It's so powerful. You know, I think that, like many people, you just can't unsee what you saw. It is the pictures that they showed of the beaches, the landfills, and the tremendous waste that we have created is just, you know, it angers and upsets any of us who saw it. And there was, you know, what's deeply concerning to me is it's really a lot of this is the result of thoughtless decisions from companies who created these products. And as a former product management person, I was responsible for some of those. I used to work in the bottled water industry. I've worked for Procter & Gamble. I've worked for Newell Rubbermaid. So I own this myself. And we, as consumers, we bought these products, and this is where we went. We believed that they were going to be recycled and turned into everything else. But the reality is we have that in other countries. We even have that here in the United States. We have this photo that is care of Councilman David Marks. It's a photo of the Baltimore County Back River. After a storm surge, you can see the tremendous amount of waste. Much of it is plastic. Most likely the majority of it is plastic because that would be what's floating. You can drive on any number of our roads throughout our entire state and pretty much the entire country and find plastic bags and bottles and things along fences, in vegetation. It's everywhere. Despite the countless volunteers that work to clean this up, we just can't keep up. We're not going to solve the plastic pollution problem by more recycling or anti-litter campaigns and cleanups. It's simply that we've got way too much coming at us plastics, and we can't recycle our way out of it. For perspective, in 1980, we were producing about 70 million metric tons globally. By 2015, just 35 years later, we were making over 380 million metric tons, or a 540% increase. Our cities and municipalities are overwhelmed. Manufacturers want more and more virgin plastic. We pay to clean it and sort it, but the piles of it grow and grow. Our landfills are filling far too quickly. We're told by industry that we have a plastic waste problem because of bad waste management, that it can be addressed by more taxpayer funding for recycling. The plastic trash is a resource for energy recovery. According to Shell Chemicals, the challenge is not with the plastics themselves, but it's what happens after people use them. We're told that plastics are widely recyclable. Actually, that's a term that Nestle and Procter & Gamble are seeking to put on number 5 plastics, even though only 2.7% of those plastics actually get recycled into any usable product. That's what they want to call widely recyclable. Plastic pollution, and plastic products are really, the product of fuel extraction. Plastics are made from oil and gas. And just like the oil and gas that they're made from, they also contribute to climate change. They contribute harmful chemicals that emit toxicity from extraction to production to incineration. And they're a significant source of air, land, and water pollution. We need to do something to turn off the spigot. We need to use less. We also need to create a more virtuous cycle in our waste. We need to reuse and repair the things that we make. We need to compost our food and yard waste. We need to use less, and we need to create effective recycling programs that work with plastics that are made to be recycled. So I'd like to show you all a very short video. Let's see. There's a woman down in St. James Parish in Louisiana who is doing an amazing job fighting the plastics industry. And I'm just going to share a couple minutes of this video. We'll put the link to this video in the chat for you to watch the rest of it. And we'll also be sending it out in an email. But I want to share just a couple minutes of this video because I think it's so incredibly powerful what this woman is doing.
Marie, I don't know if it's sharing sound right now. If you want to go back and click share sound, or I'm happy to share as well.
Can you do it?
Yeah.
Just to make sure I don't screw it up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll do stop share.
Sorry, 1 second. Just want to make sure I'm pulling up the right one.
Thank you.
Yep, that's it.
And Lindsay will run it until 2 minutes and 34 seconds.
Okay, sounds good.
When I was a little girl, we had everything: fresh air, clean water, productive soil, and everything a person would need to survive. Everything was wonderful. Things started to change in the late 60s when the first industry came in. The last few years, I found out that so many people were getting sick and people were dying. But I didn't associate it with industry until 2016 when I went to the doctor and I found out I had autoimmune hepatitis. And that's when I did my research, and I found out that it came from industrial pollutants. I've seen so many people get sick, and I've seen so many people dying. My sister-in-law died with breast cancer. She worked in the industry, and one of the friends of mine died with throat cancer, and a whole lot of other people died with cancer. A whole lot. You can't sit down and just write a list. It's that many. So many people are sick now as we speak with cancer. I would go to the meetings once a month at the Help Association. The Help Association is humanitarian enterprise of loving people. So I went to that meeting 2.5 years and sat there and listened to them say nothing could be done about the plan. So I would come home after the meeting all upset and take my bed, go to bed, lay in the bed and cry sometimes. And I would tell God about it, but I wouldn't wait for an answer. I would just tell him and then I would go to sleep. So one day I sat on this same porch and I started talking to God. But this particular time I listened. I was so hurt and I was crying. When I asked him if I should sell my land, the land that he gave me, because that's my grandparents' land, and they worked for this land. And to my surprise, he said no. And the tears came all down my face. I started crying and I looked at the birds going back and forth. Then I asked him what I should do. And that's when he told me to fight.
So I just want to share, the video goes on for another couple minutes, and I hope that you all will have an opportunity to watch it. But Sharon Levine talks about what she did to fight, and she forms a group called Rise St. James in her community with her fellow residents, and they work to make their voices heard in the legislature. They start legal proceedings, and I'm happy to report that in the news about a week ago, Sharon Levine and her group won 2 very important legal battles against the chemical companies to stop the expansion. And it was the first time this community has actually ever seen something go their way, and they made it happen. She is an inspiration to us all. She's an ordinary woman who just stood up and said, we cannot allow this to continue to happen. So she's truly heroic to me. So anyway.
All right, thanks, Marie. We're gonna jump into the panelists now. We're gonna start with Jen Iosa. Jen is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Baltimore County. Previously, she was the Executive Director for Blue Water Baltimore, Vice President and Program Director at the Chesapeake Conservancy, scientist at Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and had senior roles in Maryland Department of Planning and Natural Resources. With the county, Jen is working to integrate sustainability and climate resilience into county programs, policies, and budgets to improve the way the county government works. We're so glad our county leadership has invested in Jen and is working towards a more sustainable future. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you for that, Rob, and Marie for the invitation to be here tonight. So I have to say that even though I have been a part of the environmental advocacy arena for the entirety of my career, which is probably close to 25 years now, I was still astonished by what I watched when I sat down to watch the story of plastic. The sheer magnitude of the crisis that we in the West have largely created and bestowed upon others in the world was really impactful, and it was really staggering to me. And as I thought about, what I might want to say tonight to the group of folks that are here, I came back to something that has always bothered me. You know, I did not grow up in a region of the country that was particularly progressive. And I am really the only one in my family that's sort of branched far left, if you will. And as I, have talked with friends and family members, who maybe don't think about these issues quite as much, I always hear kind of the same refrain. It's about convenience. It's just so easy to pick up the plastic cutlery or grab the plastic water bottle, or to not have to wash the dishes after a big meal. We have become such a society of convenience that we really don't think about what happens when we're done with the things we've used. And I think the notion of recycling has really given, I think, too many folks sort of a false sense of complacency, really, that it's okay if I don't make the extra effort to reuse or refill, or use something that is more durable. It's okay if I use that plastic cutlery or rely on the packaged bottled water or whatever the case may be, because I recycle. And what they don't know is that that's not the end of the story. And I think that this documentary film really very vividly brought that to life. And so, when I first started my career, I'm a water quality scientist by training, and trash as a pollutant was a really tangible way to try to engage people in the conversations about what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, how our activities are having an impact. But as a resident of Baltimore City and a employee of Baltimore County, I've really seen that is no longer that's no longer a hook for folks. Trash has become, plastic trash especially, has become so ubiquitous along our city and county streets, along our waterways, after storms, clogging storm drains, that I think a lot of folks are unfortunately just further desensitized. What can one single person do? It doesn't matter if my plastic container, misses the bin. It's not my responsibility. I'm meeting the needs of my family. I'm working hard. I'm going about my business, and I recycle. But I really think that we need something more, perhaps things like this documentary, to sort of shake folks awake that this isn't the way that it has to be. And we all have a role to play in the way that we consume. I always call it voting with my pocketbook. To me, that is a stronger reflection of our democracy when I choose what I'm going to spend my money on. That I'm not going to take the plastic cutlery or the single-use, plastic stuff. How do we convey this to others, to the busy mom, to the complacent college student, to the folks who really think that all of this has been a huge boon for us, in our daily lives. I had a teachable moment not that long ago where a colleague of mine had asked, can't we recycle all of those plastic or plasticized cardboard election signs? We've all seen them up and down the streets. And so I did a little digging and I talked to some of the folks in our solid waste division, and they said, no, unfortunately, we can't recycle those signs. And I said, well, why not? And his response was, well, there's no market. And so I conveyed that response to my colleague, and she said, well, that doesn't make any sense. You can either recycle it or you can't. And I said, you're missing the point. Recycling is all about markets. Do you really think that if it goes in the blue bin, it disappears or it suddenly becomes a t-shirt? It really doesn't, it's all about markets. And unfortunately, a lot of our quote unquote market for recyclable plastics is not going into making those great t-shirts or new durable plastic containers. And again, I think this documentary really sort of hit the nail on the head that we dismiss ourselves from any real responsibility because we recycle, when really most of that material is not being recycled in the truest sense of the word. And so I tried to get a little bit of information, figuring that some folks in this audience would want to know what Baltimore County is doing. And what I found is that we don't sort our recyclables, so that we really can't say how much of what comes into our materials recovery facility is plastic. We can quantify what we ship, what we sell to other folks, and that is about 2,700 tons of plastic material a year. At least that was the number in 2021. And when I asked who was buying this material, I was told that most of it is purchased by domestic brokers, end users, and occasionally we send things to Canada. And apparently this changes quite frequently because, again, it's about markets. And so, my view on this is we need to do a lot more education of ourselves, our colleagues, our friends, our family members. We need to stop using recycling as sort of the end game, or using that as sort of our sense of personal responsibility. And I do think we need to get more serious about extended producer responsibility, reducing, the solution to pollution used to be dilution. That doesn't work for water. It certainly doesn't work in the sense of solid wastes and recycling. And so we really need to be reducing our consumption and holding the companies that are pushing this petroleum-based material into the marketplace, hold them to account. So I look forward to working with the Sierra Club and all of the groups who are participating in tonight. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Jen. We will have opportunity for questions later. If you wanted, in the meantime, put questions in the Q&A section. The chat may not be available. We can address them after all the panelists. We're going to go to Paul Kazak. Paul's an award-winning instructor and retired scientist from the Department of Natural Resources, a longtime graduate lecturer at Johns Hopkins University. He teaches courses in leadership, sustainability, and aquatic science. Beyond his teaching, Paul's a climate reality mentor with the Climate Reality Group and is committed to helping put the world on a path to sustainability. He's worked extensively with high school youth, undergraduate students, and groups that vary from NGOs to schools to government agencies. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thanks, Rob. Marie, can you pull up the PowerPoint? There we go. So just a few really easy slides. And the first one is, I always like to look at problems in terms of where they sit. And this one, I think, has problems within the plastic problem, as well as it fits into a larger societal problem. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so I teach leadership, so I got to throw this in. I think that this problem will require successful resolution, will require lots of exercising leadership. And what I mean by leadership is getting people to do things they would rather avoid, the hard stuff. And in our case, we have this, and it's been mentioned already, the idea of a disposable, very convenient society. Even one of my children, whenever we have birthday cake after dinner, we have real plates for dinner. When we have the birthday cake, it's plastic plates that are thrown away, and it bothers me. And as a parent, you wonder, like, how did that come about from an Envirothon competitor and all sorts of things? So it's very easy to fall into. So anyway, that will require leadership. Next slide, please. So I just want to give you some things to think about. This problem with plastics is absolutely urgent. It does play into the climate problem that we have. And so we need to work on it. New production of plastics is kind of the solution for the fossil fuel industry as we transition to electric cars and so forth. So this is something that, has an urgency about it. And then even beyond that, the ongoing production, and think about, I think in the film they said 50% of the plastics in the ocean was generated in the last 15 years. I mean, so we are just in this exponentially increasing kind of thing. So we need to work on this problem. We can't just set it aside. And I would also argue that we can't take approaches that aren't nested with each other. So if you go through a big production to get plastic straws banned, and then you sit and just sit back and say, oh, we got plastic straws banned, you are not really addressing the problem. And so I would argue that the urgency of this situation means that we need to have nesting. It's not that you wouldn't go after plastic straws, but you would follow that quickly. It would be, okay, and now we need to do this, ever scaling up so that we can make this problem just go away. Next slide, please. And the status quo, which is, it's difficult to get legislation passed. It's difficult to get your children to change their behavior. All of it is difficult. The status quo is always in our face. In our case, I think with plastics, the idea of recycling, that just won't work. And years ago, I went to a National Science Teachers Association conference up in Boston. I was getting an award as National Environmental Educator of the Year. Wow, big deal, right? And there was a T-shirt vendor, and they had to do one thing for environmental things. So I bought the one that said I had a hybrid, And at the time, I guess I was maybe a little naive in thinking that doing one thing was enough, right? So taking and using a metal straw instead of a plastic one would be enough. No, it's not. It's not even enough to just take care of your own piece of the mess. Given the urgency of this problem, we all need to get involved at a deeper level, okay? And part of that would be, we need to write the rules. We can't have industry writing the rules. That is what typically happens. That can't be. So we need to insert ourselves into places where we don't like to go. And if you think about the country of Ukraine right now, they are in a situation of survive by everyone pitching in, or you won't exist anymore. And so this plastics problem and the climate problem in general is one that is exactly that, but it's not it doesn't seem or feel as urgent to us. So we do need to all get involved. So for those of you out there that are listening, we need to figure out a way how to do that, right? The other thing is a frontier mentality. We think that, oh, we could just throw that away, or as somebody mentioned, oh, my plastic didn't make it into the bin, it's all right. Those days are over. We need to actually care for Mother Earth in a way that she deserves, and that there is no frontier anymore. You can't just, when you're out fishing, submerge your plastic Coke bottle or whatever and let it sink or float away. And then it ends up going back to the way we think about our position in the world. And some of you may recognize the author of this quote, "Our way of life is non-negotiable," was Dick Cheney. And I think it's really appropriate for all of us, not just Republicans, but we all have that. And we need to just give that up. Like, we can be different people if we choose. We can choose to forcibly reject plastics and forcibly insert ourselves into the governance system that we have. Next slide, please. Is that it? Nope. One more. Okay. So some observations, right? As an instructor, I like to give the work back to the students. Like, you guys are going to need to come up with solutions, but I think about this stuff a lot as well. So systems thinking, I think, will be really important. And I'll give you two examples. Since all of you should be familiar with Chesapeake Bay and its restoration, I'll use that as a really bad example of how to go about things. And the reason is, one of our primary ways to reduce nutrients is by planting cover crops. We spend $25 million a year. We pay farmers. The day we stop paying farmers is the day they stop planting cover crops. So it's actually, if you look at social marketing kinds of science, that's a dumb thing. You're taking away the carrot, they'll stop doing it. So that's a bad example. A good example is called REAMP. It was in the Midwestern United States. And an idea was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so Garfield Foundation got a bunch of philanthropists together and a bunch of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and thought about, how do we look at the system so we have the biggest effect? One thing was, there were new coal plants being proposed all the time. So, okay, part of our effort has to be to stop new coal plants. Part of our effort needs to be to get more renewable energy and so forth. It's been really, really successful. If you haven't seen it before, I suggest that you check it out. There are websites. But again, I think for the plastics thing, you can't just have a one and done, everybody's in a silo kind of thing. We need to work together toward a coordinated solution. So that would mean we need broad nonprofit involvement. Paul Hawken, noted environmental author and environmentalist, did the math and came up with about 2 million nonprofits in the world. Can you imagine if we all worked on one issue at a time, how spectacularly successful we'd be, as compared to, okay, one group works on plastics, one group works on invasive species and so forth, and we make very little progress. So we would be much better off if we pooled our resources and worked towards some of these really critical things and get things done, right? Another thing with the plastics issue, I think we need to broaden our toolbox. Someone mentioned that educating people is an important thing. Sure, it's kind of important, but social science would tell you that educating people doesn't make them change their behavior at all. So things like peer pressure, on the other hand, very, very profoundly important. So I think we need to use social science, what we know from social science. And I'll say that as having done a career in biology and working for Maryland DNR, coming up with really good science about watershed imperviousness and so forth. Ultimately, I don't think it makes any difference because there's politics involved and so forth. So you need to think about what will change the needle, right? And then it's really obvious to me that the consumer, if you want to call us that, I call us citizens, but the end user of plastics is not the place to get the solution. It needs to be supply driven. To the extent you can take away the choice from people that are buying the materials and make them make the right choice, I think that's a great way to go. So I think that's all I have. Thank you for letting me pontificate for a minute.
I just want to remind the folks who've joined that if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. If you hit the bottom bar, you'll see the Q&A section. If you write your questions in there, we'll open up the chat after the panelists are finished, but we want everyone to focus on them and not in the chat.
Thanks, Paul. So our third panelist is Judith Hank. And as Marie said, you can put questions in Q&A, and then after Judith is finished, we'll open up to live questions or questions from the from the Q&A, and we'll open up the chat as well. So we're really happy to have Judith joining us tonight. She's leading the fight against the excessive use of plastics. Judith is the founder and president of this amazing environmental organization called Beyond Plastics. Prior to that, Judith had an esteemed career. She was an environmental advocate and has held top influential positions in state and federal government. She was appointed by President Obama to be the regional administrator for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Judith is now a senior fellow and visiting faculty member at Bennington College, where she teaches classes on plastic pollution. So welcome, Judith.
Thanks, Rob. It's so great to be with all of you. Paul and Jen, amazing comments. I agree with all of them. And to Paul's point that we need leadership, I spent a lot of time talking to Sierra Club chapters and climate reality chapters, and it reminds me that when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And you all have been doing that on a range of issues. And Marie, I really want to commend you for showing that great little video clip of Sharon Levine. I happened to have lunch with her and her daughter yesterday, and she is incredible. She is a retired special ed teacher. She's standing up to Formosa Plastics in St. James Parish, Louisiana. And you can read about Sharon's journey and others in the latest Sierra Club magazine article. I've been a Sierra Club member for years, and Christina Marusik has a great cover piece, Investigates Plastic Pollution. And what she does in this piece is very clearly explain to us how plastics is a climate change issue. Paul mentioned the fossil fuel industry has less market demand for electricity generation and transportation. Plastics is their plan B, yet there's no plan B for the rest of us. What this reporter also does in this article is go into detail about how plastics is an environmental justice issue. I teach a class online on Zoom on plastic pollution. That's how I met Rob. And I always point out that plastics, we need to focus on production, use, and disposal. And we often leave out the first part. This movie certainly tells us about disposal and how so much plastic is exported to other countries. For years, when you exported plastic like that, the EPA, where I used to work during the Obama administration, counted that export as recycling. But we know that plastic recycling is only 5 to 6%. And I documented this in a report last year with a co-author, Jan Dell, with the last beach cleanup. I had an article in the Atlantic on May 30th. And what was really interesting is the plastics industry didn't really dispute my numbers. We've never got to double digits on plastic recycling. And the reason is because it doesn't lend itself to recycling. If you recycle your Sierra magazine, which you really should reuse, you should bring it to the library, not recycle it, but you can recycle this into another magazine. But there are hundreds of different types of plastics. They all have different chemical additives. They all have different colors. So you can't really mix it together and then produce a new plastic product. Sometimes you can create clothing like fleece. Problem with that is when you wash it in the laundry, the microplastics come out in the wastewater, or you can make decking with it. But that's about it. It is pretty limited. So the big plastic recycling lie is finally being exposed. And the public is confused because for years we've been subjected to multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns telling us, keep buying all this plastic packaging, just put it in your recycling bin. But now even the plastic industry admits that plastic recycling has been abysmal. So what are they doing? They're promoting plastic burning. They call it chemical recycling, but it's burning plastic to create low-grade fossil fuel. either through gasification or pyrolysis. And it's really important that in states like Maryland, that the Maryland legislature become very well educated on the problems with chemical recycling, AKA plastic burning. There are a range of other problems with plastics. The movie certainly illustrated how this is an environmental justice issue. I've seen the movie maybe 10 times because I show it in my plastics class. And every time I watch the movie, which by the way, won an Emmy last year for Best Documentary, every time I watch it, I learn something new. And so it's great that you screened the movie, and all of you tuning in tonight, you can screen the movie too, to your church or synagogue or mosque, or you can screen it at a school. You can screen it to any community or civic group that you're involved in. And I think it's very moving. I have met many climate change skeptics. I've never met a plastic pollution skeptic, because the evidence is everywhere. The plastic bag is in the tree, the plastic water bottle is in the street, and more people are understanding that if you litter a plastic bottle, either by mistake or on purpose, God forbid, and that gets into the storm drain, it gets into the river, it then gets into the ocean. And we are turning our ocean into a landfill. Microplastics are showing up everywhere. It's in rainwater. Microplastics is in honey. It's in beer. It's in seafood. And it's in drinking water. And it's in us. There are peer-reviewed scientific papers documenting the presence of microplastics in our blood, in our lungs, in breast milk. And a recent Italian paper by Dr. Ragusa found microplastics in the human placenta on both the fetal side and the maternal side. So our babies are being born pre-polluted. So the future doesn't look bright, because in 2020, 367 million metric tons of plastics were made, mostly because of hydrofracking. And this is forecast to triple by 2050. But I don't think that is going to happen, because the public is really paying attention and insisting on change. What are the two key things that can really move the needle in Maryland? One is all of you working together to pass a strong bottle bill or beverage container law. I worked on the New York bottle bill when I was a college student. It's been around for 40 years in New York. Do not do the math. And it is incredibly effective at reducing litter, promoting recycling, and creating jobs. 10 states have bottle bills. There's no reason why Maryland should not adopt a bottle bill in 2023. And the way we did it in New York and other states is from the bottom up. It's Sierra Club chapters, League of Women Voter chapters, garden clubs, Farm Bureau, local governments, environmental leaders of every stripe. I mean, it was a broad-based coalition, but it was really led by the environmental community. So just today, I had a great conversation with Martha Ainsworth, an amazing Sierra Club volunteer who I'm sure you know. This is the year to really work hard to get a bottle bill in Maryland. The second thing I want to bring your attention to is extended producer responsibility, or EPR. EPR is important. It puts some of the responsibility for financial responsibility for recycling on the companies that make the packaging. It's pretty complicated. And what's happened is we've created a political climate where lawmakers feel like we've got to do something about plastic. So enter stage right. Here comes the plastic lobbyist saying, we have an extended producer responsibility proposal for you to consider. And they're typically really bad proposals. They do not require actual reductions in packaging. They allow for plastic burning, AKA chemical recycling, and they put the packaging industries in charge of solving the problem through the establishment of unaccountable producer responsibility organizations. So you need to be on patrol for bad extended producer responsibility bills that pop up in your state. They're coming out everywhere. I shared with some of you tonight 10 requirements for effective extended producer responsibility. First of all, we need to change the name because that is a god-awful name. We should probably just call it packaging reduction. One of my priorities in working on EPR, and I'd love to work with all of you on this, is that a strong EPR bill establishes environmental standards for packaging. Just like we have fuel efficiency standards for cars, energy efficiency standards for appliances, why not environmental standards for packaging? And I think it should be reduce packaging by 50% over 10 years, 20% every 2 years, not something that comes around in 10 years and then you figure out you're not meeting it. So cut packaging in half within 10 years, and then with whatever is left, it should be made from recycled content or be easily recyclable. The second major pillar is to reduce toxics in packaging. Even food packaging has PFAS chemicals, heavy metals, and other contaminants. Third, a clear prohibition on burning plastic. Chemical recycling should not count as recycling. Fourth, an effective bottle bill, but do the bottle bill separate from EPR because it can stand on its own. You shouldn't combine it. A good EPR program provides financial relief to taxpayers and consumers. It should cover both residential waste and commercial waste. It should avoid glaring loopholes. We have 4 new state-level EPR for packaging laws on the books in the US, Colorado, Maine, Oregon, and California. But listen to this provision in the California EPR bill. Packaging companies can be exempted if, quote, the single-use material presents unique challenges in complying. That's actually in the statute. You don't want that in any Maryland EPR bill. Also, don't put the packaging industry in charge, have strong accountability, and seek transparency. So this is all outlined in this elegant fact sheet, 10 key provisions of EPR, which we worked really hard on to figure out the tricks around EPR. This is on our website. I can also share it with all of you again if you need it. I would say pass a bottle bill first. You can do it. And then on EPR, just make sure a bad or weak EPR bill doesn't get adopted in Maryland. So you have to stay on your toes on that. The way I met Rob is through my class that I teach now on Zoom. We're halfway through the class now. It's 7 evenings. It's a 1-credit class. 2/3 of my students are auditors who take the Beyond Plastic Pollution class just to learn. Another third are college and high school students. So the class will be offered again next April and May. It's a blast. I don't know if Rob would agree, but I love teaching this class. Over 90% of the students are women for some reason. You can stay on top of the class and other opportunities for engagement at our website. Just go to beyondplastics.org. You can sign up for free emails. You can also see this really cool claymation video made by Jonathan Fryer about how Coke and Pepsi is misleading the public about how many plastic beverage bottles actually get recycled, absent bottle bills. It's really snarky and creative and artistic and gets the point across in just a couple minutes. So really delighted to be with you tonight. I didn't make this up. but when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And I think that's what we're talking about this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith, and all the panelists. The chat is now going to be open, and we also have some questions in the Q&A. And if you want to raise your hand, Uta has her hand raised. I don't know if she actually wants to talk. But Uta, if you would like to, Yeah, Uta, if you would like to talk, you can. Let's see, how do I do that? Okay, I can't figure it out.
She's muted, so I'm not sure if
Okay.
she can unmute or you can
Ask
unmute
to
her.
Unmute. I thought I could. Let me see.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put my hand up.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
You are now muted. Okay.
Right.
In the Q&A,
We love Uta.
yeah, someone asked an interesting question about how do we galvanize communities that are not, don't feel affected by these issues or just feel removed from it. What are the best tactics to persuade folks to think long term when in short term they're just worried about, you know, their current food or gas costs or whatever? How do we reach out to people, particularly I guess related to plastic and feeling, you know, the importance of reducing plastics? Anyone on the panel want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I saw that question, and I really wanted to take a shot at answering it, because I feel like the way to engage communities or residents who feel like this doesn't apply to me is to speak to the things about which they care the most. And I'm going to give an example that is not specific to plastics, but I think has applicability here. So I worked for quite a few years with Blue Water Baltimore, and we're a water quality organization working in the Baltimore region, where candidly a lot of folks don't really think about nutrients or sediment in their water. They're way too focused on getting to and from work, what their kid is learning in school. But when we made the very distinct connections between water in that stream and their health, we were amazed at the number of communities and the number of residents that we were able to effectively engage. So we were no longer talking sort of abstractly about the bay down there that we don't really ever get to see. We were talking about this in terms of public health, in terms of raw sewage and mold and respiratory illness. And so I really think, and I'm seeing more in the media that is making connections between climate change and insurance rates and real estate values and other pocketbook issues that may be more resonant with folks who otherwise would not see themselves sitting at a table having a conversation about plastics.
One thing I'll say is anytime you're trying to convince somebody of something, it's not usually data that convinces them. It's the power of your story. So we need to think about stories that are compelling. And I think about, plastics being in placentas, having an eight-week-old new grandson. That's very powerful to me. It's like, what the hell is going on here that we have that? That is wrong. So those kinds of, I think the power of story needs to be emphasized.
And supporting that, the nonprofit organization that put out the story of plastic is called The Story of Stuff. I'm sorry, it's they also put out The Story of Stuff. But what is the name of the group that put out the movie? The Story of Stuff, right?
It is The Story of Stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, check them out. They have a really innovative way to reach people. And I would also say that it does not take a very large number of people to affect change. So here's my observation after years of doing this work. 5 people can make major change in a community. 5 people. 5 tenacious people who work well together. I don't think you can get a lot done on your own. You don't need 50 or 100 people. That would be nice, but you need 5 people who know what they're doing. And in fact, at Beyond Plastics, we decided we need to help build the grassroots movement against plastic pollution. Because if you don't have this grassroots movement from the bottom up, you're not going to win on a bottle bill in your state legislature. You're going to get a weak EPR bill. So we, in February, just started a new project, Beyond Plastic Local Groups and Affiliates. 3 people can come together and establish a Beyond Plastics group. Or if you're an existing group, like for instance, the Baltimore Sierra Club, you can be an affiliate of Beyond Plastics, and we share tons of information with you. We just launched this in February, and we already have 50 local groups and affiliates in 28 states. So I kind of socialized this idea with a bunch of people around the country. They agreed there was a need. And when I told them our approach, the only criticism I heard, and I heard it consistently, was that it's too ambitious. So who cares? We're doing it. And, you know, we picked 3 so people could get together. But I really, you know, I think 5 people can change the world in a local community, and we all have to try.
Thank you, Judith. And Judith needed to leave at 8. There is one specific question in the chat that went to Judith from Shilpa. What do you think of post-consumer recycled content laws? What's the pros and cons of that?
Well, the good thing, as Jen described, is it creates markets. Because if companies don't use secondary materials, then we don't have a market for all the recyclables that are being collected. And I want to make it clear, I am a big supporter of recycling. You know, keep recycling your metal, glass, cardboard, paper, but plastic is giving recycling a bad rap because it's not really recyclable. So post-consumer recycled content laws are very effective at building markets. I will say my position on this is evolving a bit in the last year. I'm not quite sure you want to use secondary materials for food grade packaging. Use it for things that are not food. However, the great thing about bottle bills is it keeps the bottle bill plastic and other material separate from the recycling bin. So you can use it for new soda bottles. As opposed, I know this is a little esoteric, if it goes to into your recycling bin, it's in there, you know, with the pesticide container, and you don't want that creating food grade packaging. So another reason to adopt a bottle bill in Maryland. You all can be number 11 in the country.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Bottle bill, by the way, is a bottle deposit bill. And it's extremely effective in the places in which it's been legislated.
Yeah, it actually substantially increases recycling of those materials, that people, rather than discarding them for 5 or 10 cents, ideally 10 cents with inflation, they find that a significant number of people will return them. And when they aren't returned, some people will pick them up and return them to get the money. So it also cuts down on litter because there's an incentive. If you pick up 10 bottles, you get $1. And some people will do that, which is wonderful.
Marie, this may not work. I want to show a chart. Can you make me a co-host and let me share the screen for a second?
I think, are you able to just do screen share at the bottom?
You're a panelist.
Okay, great. Let me show you something if I can find it. I'm not seeing it. What it is a chart that shows the recycling rate for plastic bottles, metal cans, and glass containers in bottle bill states as compared to non-bottle bill states. And the bottle bill states much, much higher recycling rate because the material is kept source separated and cleaned.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's been a while since I read this, but I think in Michigan, I think they have a 10-cent deposit. And I
Right.
think theirs is like the high 80s. Like I want to say 87. Don't quote me on that number, but it's
No, you're right.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like what people will do to get their 10 cents back. And it becomes a habit. Like when we were kids, we brought our soda bottles back to the grocery store because the glass bottles were actually reused. They were sanitized and soda went right back into the same bottle. But
Well, the beauty is that it's not just people bringing them back. It's that there's a whole community of people that collect the bottles and bring it back,
yes,
which actually
yes.
becomes jobs for people.
Mhm.
And it's really a wonderful thing. Yeah. I remember in certain places, I remember I was in Berlin once, and you could put a glass bottle on the sidewalk and it will be picked up within a minute and, properly recycled. There was a question about federal legislation tackling this issue. There is something called the Break Free from Plastic Act, if anyone wants to talk about that and why that's a good or bad thing as far as what we need to do locally.
It's a great federal bill sponsored by US Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon and also Representative Lowenthal. It would establish a national bottle bill. It would ban plastic bags nationwide. It would put a 3-year pause on the creation or expansion of new petrochemical facilities that make plastic. It also would direct the Environmental Protection Agency to implement an extended producer responsibility law. It does a bunch of really, really good things. There are over 100 co-sponsors in the House. You should see if you are a House member or 2 US senators or co-sponsors. And it is fiercely opposed by the plastics industry. So it's not going to pass this year, but I think it creates a narrative of what's actually needed to solve the plastic pollution problem. I think realistically, we'll probably see some states take some of these actions before the federal government does.
Speaking of which, before people drop off, I would like to mention that we're working hard right now in Baltimore County to try to implement a plastic bag ban, which we call the Bring Your Own Bag bill, as opposed to ban the bag. It's bring your own bag, because that's what it's all about, changing behavior. So if anyone lives in the county, in Baltimore County, please contact your county council members. They're all familiar with it. There's a draft going around, and the more they hear from constituents, we're actually looking really good on it. And a few phone calls, like Judith said, it doesn't take hundreds of people. A dozen people calling a county councilman saying, "Hey, I've heard of this. I really want you to pass it." It has an impact. So please, if you're in the county, contact your county council member and contact Jen Iosa also. Jen is all for it.
Oh, also, Deborah Spice Kleinman had also put something in the chat, and she mentioned artificial turf. And I do want to mention here in Maryland, we have done some extensive sampling of our turf across the state. In Baltimore County, we have over 60 fields of Astroturf. And that is another venue that the makers of plastics are pursuing. Now, they do tout that they use old tires and stuff, as the base layer. But it's an enormous amount of waste. We're talking truckloads of waste for each field. The field will only last about 8 to 10 years. They're frequently disposed of in a very unethical manner. We've seen the waste going into streams and things of that nature. So that's another area where they're telling us grass and weeds are not okay to play on. You should play on Astroturf, artificial turf, which has a lot of toxic chemicals in it. It can be ingested when kids fall on it. There are significant studies by the NFL on the harm that those fields do to, for injuries, because they're extremely hard on players. And so that's just another thing to be mindful of. If you are a parent or a grandparent, or you just care about kids, you might be wanting to raise some of these issues with your local PTA.
and it often contains PFAS.
Yeah, the list of chemicals in those artificial fields is really very scary. And most of them are things that, do everything from cause cancer to endocrine disruption, sterility, and the list goes on. And yet we're having our kids play on it because people are worried about playing on grass and weeds.
I want to thank our panelists and thank everybody for watching the film. There were a lot of questions about some of the information. If we're going to post it, I think, Marie, we can talk about sending out an email, follow-up email with some information, the video that Marie showed part of it, and then some information about Judith's group Beyond Plastics. And then also, please, if you're interested in these issues, to join us in the Greater Baltimore group, our Zero Waste team. We're always looking for other folks to help us support our local efforts in Baltimore, the Greater Baltimore group, as well as the Zero Waste group from Maryland. And yes, we will work on a bottle bill. We're working on the plastic bag reduction and other issues like Marie alluded to, artificial turf. So there's lots of zero waste issues, composting. So please, if you have any interest, join us. And I think that would be really want to thank all the panelists and thank everybody for watching the movie and attending.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.